Investigators call it a once-in-a-lifetime case. They found the buried body of a murder victim and put his killer in prison 24 years after the crime happened. Brian Odaniels pleaded guilty in November for the 1995 murder of Tim Smart. Now, in tonight's Crimes of the Cape Fear report, WECT's Ann McAdams takes an in-depth look at the investigation with never-before-seen images showing how detectives in Brunswick County cracked that case.
In 1995, Tim Smart drove from North Dakota to North Carolina for his job as a truck driver. Once here, he got arrested for driving while impaired and wound up in the Brunswick County Jail. His cellmate was Brian Odaniels. The men became friends, and Odaniels ended up bailing Smart out of jail and offering him a place to live. But within a couple of weeks, their friendship soured.
We speculate that it was because Tim was hitting on his girlfriend, Angie Miller, that at some point Brian Odaniels had had enough and hatched a plan to kill him.
Back on the West Coast, Tim's mother, Gail, got concerned when her son failed to show up for a job interview in Camden, South Carolina. When weeks passed and she still hadn't heard from him, she filed a missing persons report with the Boiling Spring Lakes Police Department. Officers went to Odaniels' house where Tim had been living, and Odaniels told them he last saw Tim trying to hitch a ride to his job interview.
Law enforcement had a challenge with even determining whether or not this was a sincere missing persons case or just something where a person left and forgot to notify folks.
But Gail Smart was suspicious. She said Odaniels kept changing his story. After 6 months passed and there was still no sign of Tim, she convinced investigators to give Odaniels a polygraph test. He failed, but that alone was not enough to arrest him. Years passed, leaving Gail in agony.
Gail, the pain that she went through was there's no words. And the strength that she gathered every day to keep going is just, I don't know how she did it.
In the early 2000s, some of Odaniels' friends couldn't stand the guilt anymore. They passed along a tip to the Brunswick County Sheriff's Office that Tim was buried in the woods in Boiling Spring Lakes and Brian Odaniels was the one who killed him. The sheriff assembled a search party, but they couldn't find any sign of Tim, and the case went cold again for more than a decade before a local TV station profiled Tim's disappearance.
I was actually in the office the day that we got an anonymous phone call. So I took the call, jotted down some notes, got up with Detective Smith, and we met up, looked at the case file, looked at the notes I'd taken from the anonymous caller, and realized that a lot of stuff was matching up. During that call, we were given one name of interest that we should sit down and talk to.
That name, Randy Pickard. He'd been a good friend of Brian Odaniels, and the tipster indicated he knew where the body was buried. Detectives flew to Florida, where Pickard was serving prison time for an unrelated crime.
He was very caught off guard, obviously, that we were there and we were questioning him about an incident from 1995. He denied everything, and ultimately, after lots of conversation, he came off the fact that he had helped Brian Odaniels bury Tim Smart, and gave us, again, just a good description of what he remembered 20-some years later of the area that he went to.
It was a heavily wooded area that crews had searched before without success. But this time, investigators had a lead. After burying Tim's body, Pickard said they'd pushed an old blue car over him to help disguise the shallow grave. Crews went out to the woods again, but as part of the green swamp, this area had flooded countless times over the years, and they couldn't find any sign of a car, much less a body. With a witness confessing to burying the body, prosecutors still had enough to indict Odaniels for murder, but they worried about securing a conviction.
No-body homicides are notoriously difficult to prosecute. When you add to the mix that you're also dealing with a cold case, the challenges in this case seemed almost insurmountable.
Detective Kevin Smith had been working this case for years, reading Gail Smart's handwritten letters, trying to find her son. Smith decided to give it one last go looking for the blue car and went back to the woods on his own. This time, he found an old car part with a serial number that matched the description of the car they'd been looking for.
It was exciting because this gave us new hope, brought new life back to the case to where we felt like we were actually going to recover Tim's remains.
The Forestry Service cleared the land, and anthropologists used ground-penetrating radar to help identify potential grave sites. And then they started digging.
Once we were a couple digs in and we uncovered the skull cap, that was truly a remarkable moment.
Against all odds, they found Tim Smart, his wallet and ID still in his pocket.
One of the primary motivations for never giving up and working as hard as we all did was that there was a mother out there who never got to see her son again before she passed away. There was family members out there that we wanted to give closure to, and we wanted to get justice for Tim.
And this is how we received them. And we have the little everything, all the information, but this is Tim, and now they're together. Now he's at peace next to his mom.
Gail and Tim Smart finally reunited in death.
It's amazing. It's amazing how there's still some really wonderful people who really devote themselves to doing good for others and all those involved in solving this. Thank you, thank you. The gratitude is beyond words.
Brian Odaniels recently pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in Smart's death. He was sentenced under the 1995 sentencing guidelines and will serve between 12 to 18 years in prison. John?
Well, do they know exactly how Tim Smart died, Ann?
John, they don't. When they were looking in the dirt for him, they did find a little metal fragment that they think could be part of a bullet, but to this day, they're still not sure.
But at least they found what they needed to find to get a conviction.
Exactly.
And it's amazing how his wallet was still there and preserved for that period of time.
Just waiting to be found.
Yeah. All right, Ann, thanks. Amazing.